It's time for more WIP Workshop, oh yeah! So today we're going to take a look at 3 work-in-progress LEGO creations that have been submitted to the submission email. If you have a work-in-progress mock you're working on, the WIP Workshop is here to help you. We're here to give you a little bit of advice, show you a few mocks, show you a few just genuine kind of Google searched images and things that I find to help you advance that mock to a completed mock so that it's no longer a WIP or a work in progress and it can be done and finalized. Because it's one thing to be inspired by the Bionicle Inspiration series, but it's another thing to be a little bit stuck as you're building, so we're here to help you through that. One thing I've been doing recently with the WIP Workshop, I just wanted to say this just before we start, I've kind of been, because I have a lot of the submissions through the submission email, and of course if you want to submit your own you can do so through the email you're seeing on your screen at the moment, but just make sure to include the word WIP or work in progress somewhere in the email so that I know that it is in fact a work in progress mock. But basically what I've been doing recently is I tend to go to the very bottom of the list and pick whatever's there, put that on the most recent episode, pick something in the middle, something that's sort of been submitted, in the last few weeks, and then pick something that's like right at the top, like some of the recent submissions. So that way I'm getting a pretty broad spectrum. So if you're sitting there like, why haven't you reviewed mine yet? Don't worry, it's coming, I promise. But that's also sort of the way that I'm picking it so that it is fair and I'm not favoring older submissions or newer submissions. I've got a healthy mix of all of them. Anyway, let's begin. So the first work in progress mock we've got today, this one's by Ryan Stoffel. And this actually does have a name. This one is a Darth Vader revamp. I'll read what he said in the email here. He said, "Hi, hello." He said, "Hi, I'm currently working on a Darth Vader mock and need advice for legs. And if I should use a cape or multiple capes, I'd love to hear any other advice you would have for the mock as well." So, happy to help there. So let's take a look at the mock itself. I think it's really awesome so far. I love that you're using some of those Star Wars CCBS Ultra Build heads because they can be really useless pieces if you get kind of caught up in them being too heavily Star Wars. But I like that you're actually just building a different kind of version of Darth Vader. And that's also something I like, the idea of an alternate take on Darth Vader, whether it's, an alternate universe, a parallel dimension, or just how you want him to look. I like that a lot. I especially love the sort of alternate take to his lightsabers, kind of giving him these really cool like laser wrist gauntlet thingamajigs, these little wrist blades or something. That's really unique and really cool, and honestly would work pretty well on a non-Star Wars themed mock. I really like that. I also love how you've done the chest design so far here. It's a bit of a departure from the original look for Darth Vader. I can see subtle elements that are similar, but it's different, and I think that's good, and I think that's a welcome addition. I like that you are departing from the original source material here. So there's a lot going on here that I think you've done very well. A couple things that I would recommend. I like that you've done kind of put the tire at the top of or sort of towards the bottom rather, depending on where you're looking at it, the bottom of the upper arms there. You've got a tire piece there. I reckon take that tire piece out, turn it inside out and put it back in, because I think the current texture of that tire is contrasting a little bit with the rest of the textures on this mock. And if you were to do that, if you were to sort of flip it inside out, that would fix things. I think it would have the very same texture. Pretty much every tire you can flip inside out. Some of them can be a little bit more difficult if they're a bit smaller or an awkward size or whatever, but you can do it just if you got a lot of persistence on some of them. Some of them it's pretty easy, but I reckon that's something that would work really well there. It's a little hard to tell where the stand begins and where the body ends and all that sort of thing, but I think at the moment, I reckon you could do with lowering the waist down a little bit more. I think it looks a little bit high, but maybe you're already doing that and you just haven't got to that area yet. But that's just one thing that I reckon could work well. Before you said, do you think it was wise to put in any capes onto the mock? I think it could work. I just think it could work without it, Maybe you want to really depart from the original look for Vader and not have any capes. But that being said, I think capes would also work well. And on that, let's transition into a few general kind of Google searched images that I've seen that I think could help you out here. And I'll talk about capes as we go with that. So taking a look at this really, really cool image of a sort of alternate look for Darth Vader. That's more or less what I Googled. I just kind of Googled alternate Darth Vader. I like what this is doing because it's very, very similar to the original, but little subtle changes. A lot of it's more textural, and certain things like the sort of buttons on his torso and just the general look of his helmet has just been refined and altered slightly, which I think is awesome. So to some degree, I think you could take ideas from this. Specifically, I like the idea of maybe if you wanted to keep the sort of buttons on his torso and do like they've been done here. Just change up the design, switch out some of the colors, give it a more triangular look to some degree, And yeah, see how that looks, you know, taking elements like that, looking at the original Darth Vader and going, okay, how can I really alter that? You know, I think that could be an interesting way of doing it. And this one here has a cape that's very similar to the original, but this one doesn't. This one has a very different cape and a very different look, and looks awesome, actually. I like that this is a bit more of a fantasy look for him. He looks more medieval and evil. Spikes on his helmet, a more sort of skull-like look to the helmet. I think it's good the helmet you've got. I reckon you don't need to change that, but maybe if you can find some way to add some spikes onto it or something, that could be interesting. But also just some of the other general elements on this sort of more ribcage look to his torso, making it look a little bit more skeletal. I love that idea. That could be something you could play with, which to some degree you're actually already doing. You've used that sort of skeleton piece on the torso before. So if you could play with that even more, maybe get a few more claw pieces and sort of angle them in some fashion, that actually could be sick. I also like the shoulders on this mock, how he kind of has that Jon Snow sort of fur pelt look to the top of his cape there. That looks awesome, and maybe you could do something similar to that, sort of layer a few capes sort of along the top and have them kind of flowing out to not only just look cool, but also to give him this more sort of bold, in your face, sort of very broad-shouldered look that makes him look very strong, sturdy, and powerful. That could be something you really play with there, which I think would work well. Or if you don't want to use that with cape, so that isn't quite working, maybe you could just change that out for spikes, maybe making that look a little bit more like a sort of, I don't know, someone from Kiss or someone from the band Kiss, of course, or just some sort of heavy metal looking armor of some kind, maybe like really spiky shoulders. That could be better than cloth. Could be a route to take. And then there's this alternate look for Darth Vader that I also liked, and this is kind of going back to the original roots for a lot of inspiration for Star Wars, more of a samurai look. And this is a Bandai toy you can actually buy. It's not cheap, but they kind of do this with a lot of different Star Wars characters, reimagine them in a more sort of samurai-looking aesthetic. I personally am not as big a fan of them. I like what they're doing, I like the look and stuff, but I'd rather buy a typical Darth Vader figure than a samurai-inspired version. But for what you're doing, this is perfect, you know? So maybe you want to do something like that, really play with the waist and give it that really awesome sort of, samurai kind of waistcoat look. Or really play with the helmet a bit more, give it more of that samurai helmet look, or just find more ways of giving it this really interesting padded armor look. And really playing with the swords maybe. Although I like what you've done with the weapons, so maybe not. But hey, maybe you want to give him an additional samurai sword as well, so he's got multiple weapons. It could be something to play with there. So there's a few thoughts. Let's look at two mocks now, just so that you have a more direct Lego take on how to approach the mock. This one here is by Cameron, and it's called Shadow Lord Tahu. I really like the leg design on this one, and I think you could do something fairly similar, getting some larger mask elements for the thighs, and then having some of those ultra build sort of shin pieces to transition down. And I quite like how Cameron's done the leg design on this. It looks a little more sort of almost goat-like, a little bit like you would see certain depictions of the devil having goat legs. So you could even do something like that, really playing with the leg design. Does he have feet, or does he have more sort of hooves or something like that? I like that a lot. I also like how the torso's been done on this, putting a few sort of tubes in there and using this tumor mask here to sort of form this sort of piston look for the waist. You could do something similar to that, and I think honestly it could work really well. So you could kind of expand the torso in some regard there. I don't know if the tubing is a little bit... well, Darth Vader doesn't really have any tubes in him, but, you know, the whole idea of him being more, you know, machine than man now, I'm sure underneath a lot of the armor he has sort of stuff like that. So maybe you could actually, add more to that and show off sort of tubing on the design, although maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe it doesn't work, or maybe to you that's a little too close to the original and you don't really want to do tubing, but there's a few options for you at least. Another mock here also by Cameron, and it's called Toa Kopakashu. What I like so much about this is kind of the samurai design thing I was talking about before. I feel like to some degree the torso, the waist rather, on this mock is kind of embodying that. I think if you did something similar with the waist here, using that larger Hero Factory torso and those two sort of shoulder armor pieces there to form this sort of waistcoat, really sturdy, padded out waist design here, that could work well on the mock, and it sort of subtly shows little elements of sort of samurai armor, but it's not too directly referencing it. It's sort of taking it into your own light, kind of modernizing it to some degree, which Star Wars is kind of a modernization of sort of samurai, and I mean it's sci-fi, you know, so it's maybe modernization is the wrong term there, but it's certainly you know, taking concepts and expanding them. So you could do something like that for sure. I think that actually would work well. And this mock also doubles of having that sort of very broad-chested, broad-shouldered look, which your mock also has and could benefit from if you wanted to expand upon it even more, I reckon. So yeah, a few things I think that you could take a bit of inspiration from on this mock here. Even the leg design, honestly, that could be pretty similar to what you could do, and I think would work really reasonably well. I think yours would have to be a little bit thicker and a little bit larger on the legs, just because your mock is a bit taller than this one and is a bit more of a Titan than a Toa. So yeah, play with that. I think that could work. So hopefully that's helped, and if you need a little bit more, don't be afraid to message me on my social media somewhere, and I'm happy to help you out in other ways if you need it a bit more. On to the next one. This is by the Illuminito Zero? Ooh, the Illuminito! Something like that. So I read what he said in the email. He said, "Hi Ben Cossy, I would really want to show you my whip mock. It can count as technically finished, but I need to work on the color scheme and the leg design because the current one is really limited. Do keep in mind that I'm trying to make it as functional as possible. Thank you." No, thank you. Cool. I can help you with that. So in terms of the color scheme, definitely watch the color blocking episode as well as some of the other BIS episodes related to color scheme. I've had a few people message me recently on Instagram asking for a bit of advice on mocks. You know, they're like, I need help with the waist, or I need help with the the arms or something. And I'll go like, have you watched the BIS episodes on that? Because, a lot of that actually is probably already there for you. And they're like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. And then they watch it and they're like, oh yeah, that helps. Thanks. And I'm like, yeah, cool. It's not that I'm like, I don't want to reply to you. Just go watch an episode. It's more that some of that information might already be there for you. So don't forget to refresh your memory and watch some of those episodes, because that's also half the point of the Bionicle Inspiration series, is to have a bit of a catalogue of, man, I'm stuck on a leg design. Okay, I'll go watch the leg episodes of BIS, and that should help me, But of course, if you have and it isn't helping you, which was also the case from a message I received recently, by all means, send me a message. I'm not afraid to reply. Afraid to reply? What's the fear there? There's no fear. Anyway, so the color scheme on this mock, I reckon going for a more symmetrical route, specifically on the legs here, you've got sort of contrasting colors. So I reckon just making that, like almost taking out all of the gray and silver and just making that black would probably refine things up. Maybe you could possibly replace the feet with red feet. Maybe you could kind of get two distinct kind of blocks of color there, so that the hands are that sort of larger area of red, and then the feet are as well. You could even maybe make the actual head there also red. That might work. I don't know. I'd kind of have to actually play with that to really see how those blocks of color sort of match out. But that could work for refining the color scheme there. In terms of the leg design, I reckon one of the issues that you might be having with it at the moment is how the feet are connecting to the legs. You're using those, I have no idea what you'd call them specifically, but it's that interesting piece that has two sort of pin connectors on the back, and then directly in parallel to it are those two ball joints. I reckon if you could probably either A, just substitute that out for more Hero Factory bone pieces, or B, substitute that out for some sort of custom design with some ball joints and some axles and different things like that. I think that might work, because kind of having that kind of baggage at the back of the leg there might kind of limit posability, especially because you said you wanted this to be as functional as possible, which I don't quite know what that means. I assume functional as possible means you want it to be as posable as you can. So if you're aiming for that, I think, not having that at the back of the ankle on this mock here would be beneficial, I reckon, and would really help with getting some of those poses out as well. I do like the really robotic look that this mock has, kind of a more sort of slim-framed, sort of unarmored robot design. I actually really like what you're doing with the lower arms as well, and it kind of reminds me of a few images I'll show you now that could help you just, further expand the mock. We'll talk about them now. So let me get the first one up. This is just a sort of junkyard kind of construction robot, and I feel like it has fairly similar arms to you. There seem to be this sort of, I don't know, like when I look at the lift arms that you've used, I see them as this sort of like, almost like a forklift, like they would pick up some sort of material, sort of scoot it up and move it away. And I see that sort of fairly similarly here on a mock like this, just these arms that have been made to lift industrial goods of some kind. So maybe you could kind of lean in a little bit more with that, whether that's with the color scheme, maybe you actually want to change it out for a yellow color scheme like this to go for a more construction route, but maybe you're happy with the red and black and little bits of, silver and gray thrown in there. Nothing wrong with keeping it like that, but definitely thinking a bit more of a sort of backstory for the mock, like, what's its purpose? What does this robot do? That might help inform the color scheme as well as just refining the color scheme Again, nothing wrong with the colors you've got now, but hey, maybe you're like, no, I was actually going for a construction look. Maybe yellow would be more fitting, you know? But that's up to you. I don't think you have to change the color scheme entirely here. But, refining it, like you said, good would also help. But yeah, taking little notions from that, I got a few other kind of construction-themed robots here. This is another one. It's a little bit more kind of heavy set and bulkier, which your one's a little bit more slim and slender. But I like the idea of it having kind of like a cockpit at the top that someone could pilot. Maybe you could do something similar to that. I also like the idea of this kind of crane over the shoulder, which could be used as a weapon or just a way of aiding it with its task. Maybe you want to do something like that as well. A couple other things to throw in there, perhaps. Maybe you want to put little pincers on the bottom of the hands there so you can actually kind of pick stuff up with it. Or you want to keep it the same. That's also fine. And maybe since you've submitted this, you're like, you know what? I'm still not feeling this, Mark. Well, you could possibly continue some of the ideas that you've got before, specifically with the longer hands, and maybe really change it up. Maybe you could do something like this with a sort of four-legged design and a sort of more kind of rounded top for the head, with little pincery arms, still having that kind of longer arm look. It could work well. Heck, it might even be interesting if you kind of changed out the legs for that exact same red lift arm piece that you're using for the arms and using those for the legs. That could be actually some really interesting ways of doing the color blocking, but just some general kind of visual consistency between the pieces. You've got the same textures and parts up top as well as on the bottom. Could work well. It could work well. Give it a try. I don't know. Again, you don't have to change up the humanoid design you've currently got. You could do something very similar to this or not. It's up to you, but that's always what I'm aiming for on the WIP Workshop, is just throw a bunch of ideas at you and make you think in some areas you might not have thought before, to really expand your thinking. And yeah, if what I've thrown at the wall sticks, then run with it, and if it doesn't, and it falls off the wall, then that's okay too. Look at a few other mocks here. So you were saying specifically that you wanted it to be functional and posable. So what I think is really good for what you've done so far is that you've used a lot of prefab, just Hero Factory bone pieces, which those things are designed to naturally be posable because that's kind of the basis of the frame and the sets, and sets typically are designed to be very posable because it's a toy, you need to play with it. So doing that is wise, and I reckon continue doing so. But I'm going to show you a few mocks here. This one is by Mitch Henry, and it's called Pinhead and Armstrong. So these mocks too are also quite posable because they're the same. They use a lot of just your prefab Hero Factory elements. But if you take a look at the taller mock here, which I believe is Pinhead, he has those Hero Factory bone pieces, but then Mitch has put a bunch of smaller tire pieces on them, just to kind of spice it up a little bit more, give it a more unique and interesting texture. So you could do something similar. But if you don't want to limit the posability with the pieces that you're putting on the bone, the tires wouldn't do that. But maybe you're like, actually, I'm going to armor it up more, put some armor on top, and branch out and put some other interesting pieces on it. If you don't want that to hinder the posability of the mock, make sure that a lot of the pieces stay away from the actual joint itself, because then that way nothing's going to obscure the actual articulation points on the limbs or wherever it is that you're building. So that could be something you do, is just finding unique ways like this to armor up the Hero Factory bones, but also still using the Hero Factory bones so that you're not limiting posability. One other mock by Mitch Henry here that, again, uses prefab bone elements and shells, so that posability is still key. But certainly something that Mitch is doing here that I really like is a really funky, interesting way of designing the head, with this larger trans neon green barrel prison element piece that came on those Invasion from Below sets, and then the little flower in his hand there. So there's a lot of kind of posability, a really unique, cute looking guy here. I don't know if there's certain things you could do to also kind of have elements of that. Like, do you want to give this mock a lot more sort of personality? Maybe you want to give him a little prop that he's holding, or finding an interesting way of designing the head to really pack in a bunch of emotion. Or do you want the head design to be really obvious where eyes are? So you maybe put some translucent elements where an eye stalk would be or something. It could work well. Could be an interesting way of spicing things up, or not. Maybe you want to continue with very similar aesthetic to what you've currently got, and that's also fine. So see how you go. Continue playing around and see what works. So that's it for that mock. On to the last whip that we have today. And now this one here, this is by Riley Tordoff. And Riley's 10 years old. Awesome. Great to see you building very, very well for one so young. We'll watch your career with great interest. No, great stuff here. He was saying in his description that he did say, by the way, that he used the Bionicle frame for this mock, which is awesome as well. Don't be afraid to watch the Bionicle episode if you're looking at this frame now and you're like, oh, I'd like to build something similar. There's links in the description of that video for the Bionicle frame episode for instructions for how to build the Bionicle frame. So, yes, that is more or less what he said. Oh, he also said in the email, he said, could you pick a name for my mock? I am happy to point you in the direction for names. Names are not always easy, and I reckon it's always a bit better when the actual designer comes up with them. But I'm happy to throw some ideas at you, but I'll throw those in at the end there. So, this mock here, looking really cool so far. Awesome that you've used that Bionicle frame. It's always such a great impetus to starting a mock, just to build that frame and then layer it up around everything. That's a great idea, so awesome job. I like that your mock kind of has those kind of more pronounced knees, using those orange CCBS shells there as a kind of knee pad. That's pretty cool. And I also like the kind of visual unity between the feet and the claws on his hands. They're two very distinct pieces, using those actual posable claws for the fingers versus these sort of prefab feet elements here. But it works. I think it works really well too, because one has the 3 claws, the other has the 3 claws, and they're very different pieces, but they have very similar looks and textures to them. So that's awesome. There's a beautiful sense of cohesion there. I like that a lot. So let us now branch out into a few other examples here that I think could help you out. So I'll show you a few images first. I think some of these are pretty similar to what you've designed specifically. Both of these images that I'm showing you now, they are characters sort of sitting on a throne, or at least sort of sitting down, and your mock was as well. I almost like the idea of maybe if you've got the system pieces, or you even want to do it with some Bionicle pieces, maybe you could build a throne for this character to sit on. I actually reckon that could look really, really cool, and would fit the character well, especially with the pose that he's in now. That could work. Focusing on this image here, I like also the idea of a big sword. That could fit this character really well, I reckon. Specifically, one with sort of more sharper edges to it that can kind of match the armor. At the moment, you've kind of got those orange spikes on the back. I like the idea of this mock kind of having this more, sinister look, the longer claws, horns on his helmet, sort of spikier armor. Maybe even a cloak as well, sort of definitely a big bad evil guy with a cape. I reckon that could fit well. So I don't know if you want to play around with some cloth elements. I think this mock could work without them, but it's something to at least think about and play with if you've got them. In terms of the torso, I think very similar to these images, kind of focusing in on very sort of smooth armored textures, maybe even focusing on some larger armor pieces that can really cover up that whole area there. I think that could work well. Let's go into some Lego examples, because I think some of the torso designs on these mocks are something you could very much get a few ideas for. So this first mock's by Jafa, and it's called Azazel. And this one also uses the Bionicle frame. Actually, both of the examples I'll show you use the Bionicle frame, so that itself is helpful because you're in a similar position to where they're at in that sense. So taking a look at the torso, he's used some pieces that he's also used on the knee pads and the waist, and he's put those on the torso. So there's sort of a good amount of unity between all the elements there, just repeating those pieces, or repeating the textures, and having a sense of unity between everything. I think that's wise. So you could even repeat some pieces that you've already used on the mock and put them on the torso, just so that everything flows together nicely. But additionally, doing something like this, getting that larger piece, putting it in the middle, getting some mask elements as well, putting them on the torso, and some other armor pieces that kind of sort of flow over the shoulders onto the sort of center of the waist there. I think something like that could work very well. And I reckon a mask similar to this too, with spikes coming out of it all over the place, would very much fit your mock. Even a tail too, the tail of this mock here, that could fit what you've got. It'd be great as well if you could do a wing design like this. I don't necessarily think it needs it, but it would definitely help give it this sinister look, that's for sure. And I keep talking about samurais this episode, so I'm also going to talk about this mock, which again, uses the Bionicle frame, to my knowledge. I believe so. I believe he's modified it a little bit, but yes, I believe it is using the Bionicle frame. But focusing in on the torso, as well as the waist on this mock, kind of, repeating those lift arm pieces that we were actually seeing on the last mock there, but in dark blue on this mock. Repeating that on the shoulders and the waist, giving him this sort of more padded armor look, very akin to a samurai. But also, for the torso there, giving him this sort of, singular kind of sort of plate of armor over the top, using some larger pieces there, I think could be of benefit to you, doing something similar to that. And again, another cool, big old, awesome sword. I think that would fit you well. And again, lots of spikes. I think definitely focusing on spikes on this mock is a good idea. So maybe something like that. Maybe something like that could help. In terms of names, really, what I often do is I'll just kind of look up Latin words or go to like a Google Translate and just put in a bunch of different languages and put in words that relate to the mock, like devil or spike or sinister, evil, words like that, and see what that translates to in other languages, and kind of kit bash them together with other words until it sounds nice. Things you could do, I don't know, like Mad King, Dark Sorcerer, something like that. I don't know if that's a little too kind of cliche. Maybe you want to actually give him a name, maybe similar to Jafer's mock, like Azazel, or yeah, something. Kind of look up names in mythology or other stories for depictions of evil characters, or demons or devils, or main sinister evil bad guys, the kind of the kind of antagonists rather of storylines. Kind of do a bit of research in that and Google Translate stuff, sort of put a bunch of different words together, see how that sounds, and that might be able to help you for the name for this character. So there you go. That has been 3 work in progress mocks in today's episode of the WIP Workshop. Hopefully all 3 of you got the advice you were looking for. And again, if you need more, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to lend some more advice if you need it. Like I said at the start of the episode, if you want to submit your mocks to the show, you can do so through the email you're currently seeing on your screen, but make sure to include the word WIP or WIP somewhere in the email so that I know it is a work in progress mock, because like we've seen today, sometimes some more mocks that look like they're totally finished can be submitted for the WIP Workshop, and I might get confused and just put it in a Bionicle Inspiration Series episode and not realize you want advice on it. So be sure to let me know, and of course, the more specific you can be about stuff that you're looking for or need help with, the better, because then I can specifically target that sort of thing. But if you don't really have anything specific, that's also okay, but know that the more specific you are, the more specific I can be. Additionally, you can check out the links to everyone's social media, whether that's the example mocks that I showed today, those sort of inspiration mocks. There's links to them in the description. And if the builders had any form of social media, I'll link that in the description below. At the moment, none of them do, but that doesn't mean they won't message me and add in social media later. So by all means, be sure to check that out if it's there. Additionally, links to my social media are there in the description as well. You can check that out if you so please. And that's it for today's WIP Workshop episode. Hopefully you enjoyed, and hopefully some of those work in progress mocks are being turned into finished, completed mocks. Awesome. Thanks guys. See you in the next episode. Happy building. Bye for now.